how my work was tried to be categorized as Japanese Canadian. Because as soon as it was Japanese Canadian, I was a little ethnic, doing this little work on this little community. And, you know, oh, so what are the cultural practices that still remain that they haven't lost? Do they still speak Japanese? Oh, they don't. They're not Japanese Canadian anymore. So there's this dilution. Yeah. So all these discourses books. So for me, strategically, so I moved from geography to communications to sociology, and now I'm back in communications, but it was to evade the field. And also with Asian Canadian studies, I found at a certain point what can happen is you need the internal discourse, but it can become hermeneutically sealed. So you don't look to other theories. You don't look to other ways to disrupt what's going on. And it becomes very internal. So this internal engine where...
yeah, well, Asian Canadian is a shifting framework. It's a critical framework that's shifting all the time. And depending on the context, and depending upon the assumptions and methodologies you bring to it, it will change. It will change. So it's really a highly open-ended thing. But I think my sense of it is Asian Canadian grew out of a history of conflict and racialization and struggles for human rights and social justice. That's how it came into formation. And all the texts that you're reading, that you see those issues are prominent. Now, whether in order to remain Asian Canadian, it has to retain that social justice edge is a question that all of you will have to ask yourself. I hope it retains some sense of its own relationship to its own history, and doesn't. I think if it goes too far away, it won't be what we call Asian Canadian. It will be something else, and it may be something better. I don't know. We don't know. I think the whole term Asian has to be really interrogated in the broadest possible ways. Open it up to a lot more geographical spread. I think we ought to rethink Orientalism again from the roots up to the present, because I think it's breaking down into compartmentalization again.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah, there's a degree of that, and also, I mean, I guess you've written about transnationalism and the containment within the nation. So the normative drive of that. So Asian Canadian, at what point with diaspora and transnationalism, how stable can that be? Can it be a site of work and creative sort of production? What happens with the flows? Because there's scholarship that very much can't exist and come into being as soon as you locate it within a nation. So for different flows, it may be too restrictive. So that becomes but then the question is, how can you be anywhere, and how are you located within this tension? I wanted to ask you.
The loop is gone from there. Sorry.
That's okay. I wanted to also ask you about the importance of the creative for this work in the area of Asian Canadian agency, because I think what tends to happen is in academia you're disciplined in terms of how to write an essay, how to do research, how to present a conference paper, how to be a professional subject, and there's all of these restrictions, and I think there's a sort of West Coast kind of form of creative intervention and sort of the work you've done, where the creative is really key.
Well, for me, the creative is a particular kind of spirit of anti-disciplinarity. It moves against the closure of disciplines, and it intervenes in different kinds of ways to make us more conscious of the limits of the disciplinary frame. Like, we constantly have to be aware of the limits of our frame, otherwise we will close the world off. The world will be closed off to us, and our discourse will shield us from the world. We constantly need to open up our discourse so that we are being challenged, that our subjectivities are being challenged all the time, to constantly negotiate otherness in various forms. So creativity for me is a way to open up those spaces. Now, what are the specific strategies we should have? We could have an entire workshop on that, whether it be in terms of positioning, stance, approach, method, resource material, language, different genres, like fiction or poetry coming into the academic. There's all these different ways of intervening, which we need to think about this further. But I think Asian Canadian work has already shown us that, because I think Asian Canadian literature, because of its history of coming out of racialization and speaking back to it, has had to build within the boundaries of its textuality. It has had to build an inherent critical discourse. And all of the Asian Canadian literature that I'm sure you love has built within it a critical framework. In other words, it discloses the limits of the subjective frames within which this narrative is being constructed. This is one of the characteristics, I think, of Asian Canadian literature that is positive, for me anyways. It is inherently critical. So I'm also saying that Asian Canadian criticism, maybe in the same way, could be inherently creative. If Asian Canadian writing is inherently critical, then why can't Asian Canadian criticism be inherently creative? And what ways can we inject creativity in there is another question. But the other thing that I think about Asian Canadian writing is that the time has come for it to take the kind of critical concerns with social justice out into transnational spaces. So what I would call a transversal kind of diaspora, where you translate the injustices within different national contexts into critiques of other national contexts. And I've tried that in my simple way with my work in Japan, and it's not very easy, because critiquing Japanese violation of human rights in Japan is a really tricky affair, because nobody listens to you. Because I'm not fluent in Japanese. And the attacks on me would be, what right do you have to criticize us? You're Canadian, right? So, and yet at the same time I'm thinking, well, we were interned because the state thought we were you. That we were actually substituting for you. We were the fake Japanese that went into internment camps, because if we had real ones there, you would have gone in there. So we took your place. In a sense, we